Oh, Jachi, hi.
Hi,
You
should I
are.
start?
Yes, please. We are still waiting for people to come in and join the webinar
Okay,
for 20 seconds.
sure.
Yeah, so just yeah, welcome everyone. I can read everyone on the chat. So hi everyone. We sometimes we say where we are, where we are watching this. So if you feel like you want to share where you are, that's totally fine. It's always nice to learn where you guys are. So that is really cool, I think. Okay, so we have today Dr. Magali Paquot. So thank you so much, Magali, for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you today with us. This is the fourth and last talk of the 2023 edition of Corpus Linguistics and Applied Linguistics Research. This is sponsored by the University of Murcia and the Faculty of Arts, Facultad de Letras at the Universidad de Murcia, and my own research group where I belong, that is also based in the University of Murcia. We've had fantastic speakers in this edition, and I think this has been a memorable edition. And today we have the last talk in this series. As usual, you can check out the 2022, 2020, 2021, 2022 talks on our YouTube channel. And you can just have a look at some of the talks that happened before this one. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Dr. Wu that will introduce Magali Paquot today. Jachi, thank you so much. Magali, thank you so much. And everyone that is joining us, thank you guys for being here today. Remember, you can throw your questions anytime on the chat and also on the Q&A section just below Zoom. So thanks, everyone. Jachi.
Okay, well, thank you all so much for attending today. I'm Jachi Guo. I'm one of Professor Pascual Perez-Pazares' PhD student at Cambridge. I'm really honored to be chairing today's event, but I'm extremely sorry in advance that I won't be do half as good a job as Pascual has done over the last 3 weeks. The reason I feel so lucky and honored to be doing this today is because I have the privilege of introducing today's speaker, who's Dr. Magali Paquot. Dr. Paquot is one of the world leading scholars in my area, Corpus linguistics, and she's a permanent research associate at UC Louvain in Belgium, and is the co-director of the Center of English Linguistics there. Dr. Paquot specializes in the use of learner corpora to study key topics in second language acquisition. And she stands out not just because of her impressive credentials, but also because of her ability to make complex linguistic topics approachable and understandable. You know, the feeling when you stumble upon a book or an article and you think, wow, this is beautifully clear. I wish I had written that. That's exactly the sentiment many of us, including me, experience when we read anything penned by Dr. Magali Paquot. So I won't take any further, talk any further about Dr. Paquot. Very impressive background, as I'm sure you are very keen to hear from her rather than me. Therefore, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Paquot. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Jackie, for this nice introduction. Thank you, Pascual, for the invitation. Let me just check whether now I'm ready. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today to talk about a project that I regard as hopefully an important contribution to the field of learner corpus research and to research more generally. My main goal in this presentation is to introduce the second version of the Core Metadata Schema for L2 data. I'll first provide a definition of metadata and a rationale for why it is essential to work towards more standardization of metadata in learner corpus research. I'll then review the main principles behind the development of the Core Metadata Schema and illustrate its main characteristics. Next, I'll sketch out the next steps in this collaborative effort, and I'll round off the presentation with a few concluding remarks. I'm hoping not to be too long because I would really love to get feedback and a good discussion time. So let's get started. Metadata can be defined as structured information that describes, explains, locates, or otherwise makes it easier to retrieve, use, or manage an information resource. Metadata is often called data about data or information about information. But why is metadata important for research purposes? Metadata is essential to understand your research data, whatever research data, in detail, and help other researchers to find and use your data. In that sense, metadata is of critical importance to data developers, data users, and organizations when making data fair. The FAIR principles are intended to provide guidelines to improve the findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reuse of data. And as put by Higgins 2007, metadata, in fact, is the backbone of digital curation. Without it, a digital resource may be irretrievable, unidentifiable, or unusable. In learner corpus research, metadata is crucial at every single step of the research process, from corpus compilation or corpus selection to study design and interpretation of the results. When you want to answer research questions with the help of available learner corpus data, at corpus selection, you'll need to answer questions such as, is the learner corpus available for research purposes? Does the corpus include the type of data and info about the data that are needed to answer a specific research question? Are these two sets of data comparable? If there is a need to compile a new corpus at corpus compilation stage, corpus compilers often feel at a loss when they get started for lack of relevant documentation or recommendations. What variables should be collected? How should variables be operationalized? These decisions are extremely important, and they have to be taken at the start of a corpus compilation project, as it is often difficult, if not impossible, to return to participants to request further information once data collection has taken place. The task of corpus design is essential, but it is still not well described and discussed in our field. We lack best practices and guidelines for newcomers who, in a sense, always need to start from scratch. Metadata is also crucial at study design phase. Metadata fields are the independent or dependent variables that we use to answer our research questions. They are our explanatory variables. Accordingly, quality metadata fields allow us to discuss and interpret our results and contribute to cumulative research. They help us answer questions such as, to what extent are results across studies comparable? To what extent could the results be due to uncontrolled variables? Yet, and as already discussed by Barker, and colleagues in 2015, there are major differences in quality and quantity of metadata, as they illustrated with the comparison of metadata in the Cambridge Learner Corpus and the International Corpus of Learner English. Labels for the same element can differ across corpora For example, in the Cambridge Learner Corpus, there is a metadata field for first language, which is called native language in ICO. The type of metadata differs between the two, with, for example, more descriptors of the educational level of learners in the International Corpus of Learner English. Tasks are also described very differently across the two corpora. And if you were interested to compare results based on the two corpora, it would require some efforts to identify similarities and differences. In 2017, let me just go back to one slide for a moment. No, that's correct. Okay. In 2017, Sylviane Granger and I conducted a small survey of metadata in the field of learner corpus research for a presentation that we delivered at the Clarin workshop for interoperability of second language resources and tools organized at the University of Gothenburg, Sweden. We reported a severe lack of standardization of the metadata that accompany learner corpora. Among various learner corpora, different labels are used for the same variable, as I just illustrated on the previous slides. More problematically, information about the data may be organized differently. So that, for example, in one corpus, you'll get information about the number of years learners have spent studying English. And in another corpus, you'll have two different variables, one for the number of years spent studying English at school, and one for the number of years spent studying English at university. A serious issue also arises with metadata that are provided with different definitions and operationalizations. This is, for example, the case of proficiency that can be found in the form of an institutional status, a CEFR level attributed to either the learner or the text, an official or unofficial exam score, etc. From one corpus to the next, there are also a lot of missing data, and in the field more generally, very few learner corpora come with metadata about individual differences, such as cognitive competences or motivation, which are, however, key to many SLA researchers. There is also no agreed upon practices when it comes to where to store the metadata. Some learner corpora are available as XML files with metadata in the file headers. Other corpora are distributed with metadata in a separate file. Last but not least, metadata may also be found in corpus manuals. So all of these issues have made learner corpus researchers call for more standardization of metadata in learner corpus research. Already in 2015, Gaëtan Elgilquin argued that probably as important as the refinement of certain variables is the urgent need to standardize the metadata that come with learner corpora. More recently, there have been repeated discussions and calls pointing to this urgent need. For example, after listing a number of issues related to metadata in learner corpora, Volodina and colleagues write that there is increasing convergence, however, on the need of one relatively stable set of recommendable or obligatory metadata for learner characteristics, and on another set for corpus information. Stemler and colleagues state that there is a wide range of metadata that can be imagined as desirable in learner corpora, and in the best of all worlds, the community would have already agreed on a metadata schema that defines mandatory and optional values. So we would know what to collect and how, and we would have a shared understanding of what the data meant. And finally, Tracy Ventura and colleagues argue that one important future step for the field is to work together towards the development of some kind of shared protocol for collecting metadata that would include a minimal list of required variables and recommendations as to how best operationalize them. Given the state of the art already back in 2016, 2017, Sylvian Granger and myself thought the field would benefit from a first attempt at standardizing and organizing metadata. We decided to focus on core metadata, that is a set of variables or elements that are or should be common to all learner corpora, while recognizing from the very onset of the project that the heterogeneity of learner corpus types today would probably make it necessary to develop additional modules in the future. We reviewed a number of learner corpora to identify metadata that are typically used. We also explored current practices in second language acquisition, corpus linguistics, and digital humanities, and developed a first draft of a core metadata schema for learner corpora, including about 110 elements, some of which we considered obligatory, others we considered optional. And we organized them into 5 components. Administrative metadata, providing information about the corpus itself, such as its title, its availability, its revision status. Corpus design metadata, providing information about the design of the corpus. Is it a cross-sectional corpus, a longitudinal corpus? Is it representing foreign language by learners with different language background, etc.? Annotation metadata, providing information about the type of annotation available in the learner corpus. Text metadata, for all the information about the type of text and the circumstances under which it was produced. And finally, learner metadata, providing information about the learners. Time went by, and 4 years later, together with Alex Koenig from Clarin, Egan Stamler, and Jennifer Kamen-Frey, both URAC members, we decided to join forces and take it where Sylvian and I left it back then. In fact, it all started when Alex, Egan, and Jenny contacted me because they were interested in confronting Sylvian's and I's proposal with metadata from a more varied set of learner corpora. As you may know, URAC research colleagues have collected quite a few learner corpora, many of which were collected in the classroom, more particularly at secondary school, which is very different from many of our SECO corpora and other learner corpora that are currently available. In addition, URAC research, probably given its geographical location in South Tyrol, Italy, specializes in learner language and literacy development in multilingual areas and for pluricentric languages, and have collected learner corpora in these contexts. Again, something that is quite different from a majority of the learner corpora available today. While the initial goal was limited in scope, the collaboration quickly turned into a more ambitious collaborative project. Today, we are getting close to being ready to release the second version of the core metadata schema for L2 corpora. Importantly, since the beginning of this collaboration between our institutions, we have always been concerned that because we were working for the learner corpus research community, it was also essential to reach out to the community to ensure that their specific needs in terms of metadata are met. We presented the first version of the core metadata schema for L2 data at the Learner Corpus Research Conference in 2022 and shared the schema online. At the conference, we already asked for feedback from the community, and after the conference, we also sent a request for feedback by email via the Learner Corpus Association mailing list and the corpora list. We received extremely valuable feedback and make extensive revision to the schema over spring 2023. We presented the revised version at Eurosla in late August, again asking for feedback. We were particularly interested in collecting feedback from perhaps the more SLA-oriented colleagues among us, the audience of the Eurosla conference. But so far, we haven't received too many comments. So with this presentation today, I'm also hoping that we can collect more feedback. if only of the type, yes, the revisions work and version 2 is an improvement to version 1, or no, that's not the case. Our aim is to release the second version by early 2024. So in the next part of this presentation, I'd like to introduce the second version of the Core Metadata Schema for L2 data. I'll focus more particularly on its guiding principles and major characteristics. I'll illustrate some of the major revisions that we implemented since LCR 2022, and I'll demonstrate the importance of feedback from the research community in this collaborative project. First, I'd like to emphasize again that our work has focused on core metadata, that is, elements that could theoretically be common to all learner corpora. It was an issue sometimes, which gave rise to heated discussions between us because each of us works with different corpus types, and we realized that we had a tendency to protect the variables that are important to us and regard them as core, while in fact they were often not relevant to the others. So we made an effort to work together for the community's good. And in practice, this means, for example, that for URAC corpora collected in schools, we made a distinction between core elements, corpus modes, target language, proficiency, and elements that may in the future be best described in an additional specialized module developed for corpora collected in instructional settings with additional variables such as the study level, the course level, the teacher ID, the school ID, and so forth. So a guiding principle for us in our identification of core metadata was not to add variables or categories that would only be applicable to a small set of corpora. The development of the core metadata schema and the revisions implemented in its second version are guided by our wish to represent currently available learner corpora, so that's our current state of the art, while at the same time already providing support or incentives for future research practices in the field. We were guided in this task by feedback we received from the community. For example, Alessia Battisti suggested we added an optional field called learner impairment, for instance, in cases the student is deaf or hard of hearing, something we added in version 2 because clearly these learner characteristics are relevant in our field of research. And while we haven't seen this metadata field in many learner corpora yet, this will certainly be a welcome development in the future. So if by any chance Alessia is here today with us, thank you, Alessia, for the feedback. Last week, I presented our work at the Clarin conference, and a French colleague provided very valuable feedback on this notion of impairment. She was happy to see this new optional field, but she also requested that we add a field to account for forms of atypical learning too. So we'll see what we'll do with this. But you see, all these comments are really instrumental because they help us think about what we may want to see in future learner corpora. Publications were also instrumental here, especially perhaps one recent chapter published by Steffi Wolf, where she conducted a survey to gather colleagues' needs and preferences regarding future L3 and LN corpus compilations. So when we sent our call for feedback in October last year, Steffi was kind enough to send us a draft version of this paper. So again, if by any chance Steffi is with us today, thank you, Steffi. In fact, in the survey, 31 corpus linguists and L3 LN researchers answered the survey. And when asked what kind of metadata about the learner's respondent would like to see included in an ideal corpus, nearly all respondents selected age of onset, of acquisition, and proficiency. More than 2/3 of the respondents said they would also like to see what I'd like to refer to as a more comprehensive multilingual profile included in that ideal corpus. So for each learner, info would be available on the order of acquisition of acquired languages, the degree of use of all languages from onset to current age, the context of use, etc. And as you will see in a moment, we've tried to accommodate these wishes in the revised version of the schema. Another important guiding principle behind the core metadata schema has been to work towards more fair data in the field of learner corpus research. Fair principles start with a careful description of administrative metadata related to the findability, accessibility, and reusability of learner corpora, something that is often sorely lacking from current learner corpora. These elements include providing a persistent identifier for a learner corpus and associated versioning considerations, info about availability, access requirements, licensing, a pointer to the corpus documentation or a data report, related research projects, etc. The second version of the core metadata schema includes 8 main components for 159 metadata fields. The components in bold were already present in the original proposal made by Sylviane and myself in 2017. We added 3 components: situational and task characteristics to describe the situational characteristics of a language event and or the specificities of tasks that were used to generate the learner language samples. So under situation, you'll find fields to describe the participants involved, the medium, the purpose of the language event, the setting, the topic, the register. Under task, you'll find fields meant to describe a task in terms of its prompt or instructions, to provide a link to the material used in the context of this task, to provide info about whether the task was timed or not, etc. We also added optional components for annotators and transcribers. We did that because this is the type of information that is hardly ever found in learner corpora. Yet there are many reasons why we may want to know who annotated or transcribed learner language samples. Also, whether all learner samples in a given learner corpus were all transcribed and annotated by the same person, or whether that was teamwork. The 2 components contain the same set of 5 metadata fields that describe each annotator or transcriber with a unique identifier and some details about their L1s and L2s, their proficiency in the target language, and their status. Are they experts, trained annotators, students, annotators recruited via a crowdsourcing platform, etc. Components are interrelated so that, for example, each text or language sample in a learner corpus will be associated with 1 or more learner IDs representing the learner or learners who produce the text. If there are more than 1 situation or task represented in the learner corpus, each text will also be linked to a situation component that describes the specific situation or task that served to generate the learner language sample. A learner text will also be associated with components that represent the different types of annotation available for that text. If there are different types of annotations for learner text in a learner corpus. Otherwise, this information is more usefully stored at the level of the corpus design. And last but not least, a text will be associated with a component that describes the annotator and or transcriber who processed that language sample. Each component is structured as follows. A first column with the name of the metadata field, a column with a description of the field, and please note that we still need to revise the descriptions to ensure that we provide enough information and that we use a principled set of terms. And then the next column called condition shows that the choice of a field sometimes conditions the number and types of subsequent fields. For example, here you can see that if you answered yes to the question related to whether or not the learner had an impairment, an additional field will be available to specify the type of impairment if you think that's relevant. And the next two columns relate to whether field attributes are fixed or open, and I'll get back to this in a few minutes. And finally, the last columns serve to specify whether a metadata field is optional or obligatory, and whether it is repeatable or not. And I'll get back to that also. Obligatory fields are what we regard as a minimal set of fields that are required to describe a learner corpus. They include, for example, learner's age, gender, target language, proficiency, and L1s. To follow up on a discussion that we started last week at the Learner Corpus Research Student Graduate Conference during a Meet the Expert session with Steffi Wolf and Hilary Nessie, I believe that the field really needs to agree on a common set of obligatory fields. Let's call it the hardcore, that would be collected in all learner corpus compilation projects for the many reasons I discussed at the beginning of this talk. So from the FAIR principles that should be central in scientific research to comparability issues and cumulative research. If we can agree on this hardcore, this will also be extremely valuable for newcomers in the field who want to start a learner corpus compilation project, and most particularly PhD students who will be able to rely on some recommendations at least, instead of starting everything from scratch, also with a view to make their learner data more valuable for the research community. Because I also do believe that the ultimate goal of any learner corpus compilation initiative should be data sharing with the community, of course, provided that the type of data collected can be shared. Optional fields, on the other hand, can be used to provide more info about a range of learner corpus types, but they are not required. There are two main reasons why we wanted to list them nevertheless. First, these fields may not be required, yet they may be in need of a common defining vocabulary and operationalization. So for example, learner educational background may not be relevant in all learner corpus compilation projects, yet if info about educational background is collected, it may be useful to define all the variables in the same way and use a common terminology and shared categories throughout studies. Second, some of these fields correspond to what we and other learner corpus researchers consider desiderata for LCR. As such, the metadata schema can also help learner corpus compilers identify relevant variables to make their learner data more valuable for the community at large. To put it differently, it can help learner corpus compilers identify what the field wants to see in future learner corpora. Last Thursday, when listening to Steffi Wolf at the Meet the Expert session, and the advice she gave to future learner corpus compilers to ask the community what metadata researchers would want to have for specific learner corpora, it occurred to me that we could develop this idea even further by, for example, sharing this full list of optional fields that we have today for the core metadata schema and share it with learner corpus researchers and ask the community to vote for what they would consider priority metadata. So maybe that's a future development, yet another idea for my collaborators. To be able to represent various different corpus structures that we have encountered in the field in recent years, while keeping the schema as flexible and simple as possible, we also introduced cardinality for fields, meaning that fields can be repeated. This is particularly useful for the treatment of first languages and other known languages. For example, the variable learner L1 is repeatable to account for the fact that learners may consider more than one language as their L1s. Similarly, the group of variables that serve to describe the context of use, exposure, and proficiency in other languages can be repeated so that you can describe all known languages in detail, thus providing a more comprehensive account of the possibly multilingual environment of today's learners of second or foreign languages. It was often difficult for us to decide when to use set attributes for a given metadata fields or leave them open. On the one hand, FAIR principles encourage the use of a controlled vocabulary so that others, humans and machines, can find, access, interoperate, and reuse datasets. This calls for the use of as many set attributes as possible. On the other hand, for many metadata fields, we felt time was not ripe to set and impose fixed attributes. For many of the optional learner-related metadata fields related to the learning context, language exposure, and proficiency, for example, we were not able to identify in the currently available learner corpora or in the L2 research literature more generally, sets of fixed attributes that we believed could be largely accepted by the LCR community. In these cases, we decided to let researchers decide what attributes they want to use. When possible, we sometimes offer a set of recommended list of attributes in the description, as you can see on the sprint screen for the description of listening, speaking, reading, and writing experience. But we believe it is important researchers remain free to use the attributes that best fits their needs. So for many of the less common variables, we went with Bernard 2017's principle, according to which there is a need for standards which do not limit choice, but rather facilitate an accurate presentation of the choices made. We hope that in the future, when these metadata fields are used more and some preferences emerge in the field, the LCR community will be able to standardize the use of these metadata fields further in a new version of the schema, but this will probably take some time. I already mentioned the fact that we requested feedback from the LCR community after releasing the first version of the Core Metadata Schema. With this slide, I want to illustrate how seriously we've responded to the feedback received. The sprint screen comes from the Learner Metadata tab. Purple text corresponds to text that was added based on the feedback received. As you can see, we introduced a set of additional variables to describe other languages and LN differences and the learning context and exposure and proficiency in other languages after reading the draft chapter that Steffi Wolf sent us in autumn 2022. So yes, we really care about the feedback we receive. We care because we firmly believe that our efforts to develop a core metadata schema for learner corpora will only be successful to the extent that the LCR community is given the opportunity to engage with our work. We are therefore very much looking forward to receiving feedback from the community on the extensive revisions made since LCR 2022. The revised schema is available via this first link, and we will be collecting feedback in a shared document for the next month. If you're willing to help us, please sign your comments. This will allow us to get in touch with you if we have questions or if we want to share further revisions with you. Also, while evaluating the metadata schema and providing feedback, please remember that our focus is and should remain on core metadata. We hope to be able to release the second version of the core metadata schema by early 2024. We still have some work ahead of us though, more particularly some final checks on the descriptions of the metadata fields, and last but not least, documentation. The release of version 2 will not be the end of the story, however. Surely for a metadata schema to be accepted and used by a community in the long term, it will require maintenance and further development. As argued by Higgins 27, metadata schemas develop in response to a community need and often gain wide acceptance or are widely used while still in development. Maintenance by nationally or internationally recognized centers of excellence or support from a professional body increases both visibility and take-up so that they become a community standard schema. In the future, my current thinking is that the ideal situation would be one where the authors of the core metadata schema worked in tandem with the newly recognized Clarín K Center for Learner Corpora, hosted by UC Louvain, and the Learner Corpus Association. On the one hand, maintaining such a metadata schema fits into the missions that a Clarín K Center for Learner Corpora could or should fulfill. On the other hand, I think that the Learner Corpus Association could play a prominent role here too, perhaps in the form of a working group devoted to metadata. Members of the association interested in metadata could join the working group and collaborate. Together with Jenny, Egan, and Alex, we have identified two main avenues for further development in the short to medium term. First, the metadata schema, as we've released it so far, is in the form of an Excel file, but as put by Lambert and Werner, the extent to which established standards are used is determined by the availability of tools that work with the standardized data. Alex, our Clarín guy, will look into how to merge our metadata schema with the CMD profile in Clarín and explore our options there. The Clarín K Center for Learner Corpora could also probably work towards the release of an open source survey that could be used to collect metadata directly from learners. Second, we think there is potentially a need to develop and integrate to the metadata schema additional and optional modules for specialized learner corpora. The core metadata schema does not list all the many variables that would be necessary to fully describe multimodal learner corpora, learner translation corpora, learner corpora of school languages, CLIL data, etc. The development of additional modules will require specialized expertise from colleagues who have already compiled such corpora and are using them. In an ideal situation, these researchers would work together and develop their own module and submit it to the LCA working group in charge of the maintenance of the schema for feedback and approval. To conclude this presentation, already back then in 2017, when Sylvian and I gave our first talk on metadata standardization, we concluded our presentation by characterizing LCR as a field in rapid expansion that was in need of standardization at several levels. Various aspects of what it entails to carry out a learner corpus study are still in need of standardization today, from the metadata we collect at corpus compilation stage to data formats and transcription guidelines, as well as the way we annotate our learner corpora, especially perhaps when it comes to error annotation. Standards are not imposed on a community, however. Standards emerge and develop within a community. So from the very start of the Common Core Metadata Schema project, we've really tried hard to make it a collaborative effort from the LCR community to address specific needs of the field. The second version of the schema we are about to release includes almost 170 variables. Many were added to take into account the valuable feedback we received on the first version. At first, however, newcomers to the field and learner corpus compilers more generally may be taken aback by the size of our proposed Common Core Metadata Schema. I'd like to reassure future learner corpus compilers who are interested in our work. First, many variables will only need to be filled once. These 160 variables do not correspond to 160 questions that you should ask to your participants, obviously. All administrative and corpus design variables will only need to be filled in once. All learner text situation variables that are shared across the learner corpus will also only need to be filled in once. Second, only a limited number of variables are obligatory. All the other variables are optional. So for example, only around 10 learner variables and 15 text variables are compulsory. Obviously, we hope that future learner corpus compilation projects will go for more, but that will clearly depend on the goals of the learner corpus compilation project, as well as the time and funding that can be devoted to it. We believe careful consideration of the metadata to be collected within a learner corpus compilation project is fundamental for many reasons that I have sketched out during this presentation. But here I'd like to repeat 3 of them as a way of conclusion. First, the field as a community must embrace FAIR principles and work towards the development of FAIR metadata standards. Second, standardized metadata will contribute to increased study quality in learner corpus research if we have the relevant variables to interpret our results. Third, standardized metadata will help the field contribute more to cumulative research, also in the field of applied linguistics more generally, because today, as argued by Stanley and colleagues in 2019, looking at all this from the perspective of comparability of different corpora and different research studies, which should be objective, repeatable, and reproducible, it is striking how difficult it is to compare the results from one corpus with results from another corpus, or even with results from the same corpus at another time. Last but not least, the development of a standardized metadata schema is also driven by our wish to contribute to the development of best practices for learner corpus compilation and sharing. We believe that the task of corpus design is essential. It also requires a lot of expertise. However, it is still not well described and discussed in our field. We currently lack community-driven guidelines to inform us on the various aspects of a learner corpus compilation project. And I don't think I'm very far from the truth if I say that as learner corpus compilers, we often feel we have to start from scratch when we start a new project. So with the core metadata schema, we've started addressing the issue of what metadata to collect, but there are many more areas that would benefit from more documentation and standardization. And with this, I thank you very much for your attention.
Well, amazing talk. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Paquot. So I actually worked with a 2 million words learner corpus for my PhD, and I do wish these schemas and the metadata were around at the time. And because I remember at my PhD viva, one of the examiners asked me about the missing demographic analysis. I was like, because it's not there. So with that little trip down memory lane, so let's look at some of the questions some of the audience asked. So so from I think 2 from Amman, And sorry about butchering the name. So I think you already answered about the minimum number of variables for as essential or required. So, and his second question is, if a learner corpus comes from a uniformed group, like this from same L1 or single gender, do we still need to detail metadata for each file, or just knowing the corpus type is sufficient?
Well, the idea is that depending on whether or not you have homogeneity at the level of the corpus, you will be able to, say, fill in or add the metadata only once at the level of the corpus. And this is going to, you know, all these metadata fields that you have, they can, say, in the future be automatically added to the different text or the different learners. So you should, you know, when we'll work on how this is going to work in terms of sharing a survey or sharing ways to add data in for example the Clarin website or another related website. The point will be to make it easy for users, in the sense that they should not repeat and should not fill in the same thing over and over again, right? So we'll have to find a way to fill in the metadata variables at the level where they can be distributed to the lower level if that works like that, right?
Thank you. So another question from Jose Lema Alacom. So he asked, what are the fundamental metadata elements one should gather during research? I think you've answered some of it. And how should one handle metadata that doesn't align with the project's goal? And he also asked, have you considered using AI for the development of data protocols, metadata protocols?
No, we haven't considered using AI for this part of the project. So that's one answer. And so what was the other question?
So what would you do? What would you suggest to do with the metadata that doesn't align with the project goal? Do we just ignore it, or is any suggestions?
Well, first, never ignore metadata that you need for your own, for your own project. So it means that if you're considering using the core metadata schema, you will have these variables that will be interoperable, that you can use to perhaps register your corpus in the future with a specific repository with Clarin, etc. But you are absolutely free to add your own metadata fields in your own set of metadata, for sure. We do not want to impose something, and you're free to collect more, obviously. And in an ideal scenario, you may want to collect more because you are in a specific environment and you want to contribute to the development of a specialized module that could be added to the schema in the future.
I absolutely agree. So thank you. Another question from Joyce Lim, our friend. So she asked, do you have any suggestions or ideas on standardizing proficiency levels? For instance, how do we convert the European Common Framework if none of it is impossible or that is not available, such as like a beginner on the broader terms, like beginner, intermediate, advanced?
The issue of, proficiency is a thorny issue, because we have all sorts of metadata variables that have been used as proxy for proficiency. This is typically a place where in the metadata schema that we propose, we try to move the field a bit forward by imposing, for example, that at the level of the corpus, we kind of situate the corpus in terms of proficiency, but not yet. We wish we could do it, but I think that will be for future development. At the level of the core metadata, at the corpus design, we want users to situate the corpus in terms of, are we dealing with beginner, intermediate, or advanced learners? And then we ask whether or not proficiency has been evaluated, whether it has been done at the level of the learner or the level of the text, because in the field we have two different approaches to proficiency. Sometimes proficiency is really a measure that is associated with the text. You know, you have a set of text and you have professional raters assess the text, and so you know that the text is a C2 or the text is a B1, but you don't know anything about the learner as such, right? Sometimes in other corpora you have a text and then you have an external measure of proficiency for the learner. So we've tried to accommodate all these options. Now, I don't have a magical answer to the question asked, because if you don't have the data, you don't have the data, except if you have your text assessed by professional raters, or if you find a way to check the quality of your text. But what we try to do in the schema is let's users use the proficiency labels that they are familiar with, because depending on where you are in the world, you may be more enthusiastic about the IELTS results or the TOEFL results or whatever. And again, we don't want to impose, you know, we cannot say that only this schema or this scale is acceptable. But what we do suggest is that, you know, everything will work if you have a measure of proficiency. You know, inform your future users, let us know that, you know, your text have been assessed based on the IELTS or the TOEFL. Or we also have an additional metadata variable for a conversion into the CEFR scales. So if you are able to convert your proficiency categories into the CEFR scale, I think at this stage it would be valuable, because the CEFR is kind of, you know, more and more used, more and more widely accepted, even in outside of Europe. So we added this field, thinking that maybe going towards a conversion, so letting users decide. But then if you know how to convert your results into the CEFR scale, that will be very informative for future users. That's where we are. But within this project, we haven't worked on a magical way to convert proficiency categories.
Yes, proficiency level is some topic that I remember an article written by Huskin, butchering his name, the shaky ground beneath Sapphire. And I was like, yeah, it's being debated. Well, thank you.
That must be by Holstein then.
Yes,
it's very critical. Yeah, very critical of.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So move on to Olga Lopopolo asked, so how does the metadata scheme address variables with a varying theoretical construct, such as language proficiency we touch upon, and which might mean different things in different projects for different people? And how do you, similar, so how do you standardize the variables when the original corpus description might lack of clarities on these definitions?
Okay, so for example, something we did, because Olga mentioned, did you just say native language or first language? I think I heard that.
Yes.
This has been the source of a lot of discussion between all of us in the team. And I think that what we offer is a theoretical answer. I mean, we are not imposing, we are not framing our this work within a theoretical framework. So what we're doing is that we use L1 as a tag, as a label for you know, it's just it's the same way as when in the field we use overuse and underuse. It's a methodological, it's a term. It has no theory behind it. But what we did with this label is that we are not imposing the idea that learners would come with just one L1. So this is a repeatable field, and depending on your context, depending on the learner, you can have more than one L1. And so that's our answer, our theoretical answer to an issue that we, as in working on the schema, we have no intention to go into. We don't want to impose a theory, right? So that's one, the example of the L1 is perhaps a way to answer this question, and perhaps proficiency, same thing. We are not imposing a view on proficiency. We let the different users of the schema to tell us what framework they used, what test, what approach. The only thing we tried to do, but it's also it's not compulsory, it's an optional field, is that if you want to convert this into the Cepher scales, you can do it, but we are not imposing this. So as far as I know, and Olga, please feel free to get in touch with me if you do not agree, but I don't think there is anything theory driven in the metadata schema as it stands now, at least in the second version, because I think we've been careful to avoid these thorny issues that we have no intention to solve within this project.
Well, thank you very much. I wish I could answer a similar question I've been asked. So about the native norms, I'm not imposing, it's just a criteria variable. Okay, so next question, I guess this is more basic on your experience. So Nasirin Turki asks, so how likely do you think researchers, especially corpus compilers, are willing to share their corpus and all the related metadata and annotation details to support to the replica, like replication studies?
I think the field is changing. The field is moving fast. The field has shown that it can embrace fair principles, open access. And I think we have, as a community, we have to move in that direction. Compiling a learner corpus takes a lot of time, takes a lot of energy. If you are only doing this for your own purposes, I think it's a pity. I think what we need to do is value that work of compiling a learner corpus much more. And by valuing this work much more, I think that, again, we're going in the right direction. If a PhD student compiles a great learner corpus within the framework of the PhD, well, this should be valued by the committee. If you release your data open source, you'll get a publication out of it. If you have compiled a great learner corpus with specific characteristics, you'll have a data report, a data article out of it. So I think it's if you take the job seriously, you can do something. You can do something useful for yourself too. It can really become part of the research environment. It can be valued in terms of publications. I'm the co-editor of the International Journal of Learner Corpus Research. We have a special manuscript type, which is a corpus report, where we feature corpora that are open source. So we're not interested in a report on a corpus that no one can use, obviously. But if you have a great corpus that you are willing to share with the community, and you can, explain in this corpus report how you went about some specific issues that the field is still facing in terms of data compilation, well, that's a publication. And so yeah, my answer to that is make sure that this work, which is super time consuming, which requires a lot of expertise, is valued more in the community.
It's nice to know it's a very rewarding process. Well, thank you. I'm going to take advantage of being the chair, so to ask questions. So this is something, as I mentioned, I use like 3 big corpora, but it's a lack of lots of metadata. I know how do you think the core metadata schema you propose be integrated with these like previously established corpora and that like problematic corpora?
So, you know, even when a field is compulsory, you can still answer that the data is not available. So, you know, so you can still use an NA if the data is missing. So I think that most of the corpora that are available out there that we've used for many years, it's possible to describe them with the help of the core metadata schema. The only thing is that for many fields, you'll have no answer, right? But the hardcore fields, I think they come from our survey of the corpora that are around. So we didn't just sit on our desk and thought, what should be in a learner corpus? We started from what is there to be seen. And so we also, with my colleagues, with Jenny, Egan, and Alex, we also used the schema to describe some of our own corpora. So I've used it to describe the International Corpus of Learner English, the varieties of English for specific purposes corpus, the Longdale corpus, so corpora from my own center. And my colleagues have done the same with their own corpora. And we realized, we saw that it works. So the answer is yes, it's possible because there is this minimal requirement, but you'll get empty fields, and that's not a problem. You know, these corpora have been super useful. They still are super useful. And when, you know, so with what we are suggesting now, we try to represent the current state of the art and also move forward and also point to some potentially relevant avenues for better, more useful and valuable learner corpora. I like to connect with SLA, so I think that there are many variables that we have there that are again optional. But if we add that, I'm sure that more SLA colleagues would be interested in using our corpora. So yeah.
Definitely. Okay, so I think we have could we just ask one more question? So, so from, I think similar, so from Abdu and Susanna, so they want to know whether you could tell us something about the platform where we can share our metadata for LSA, so studies, and also at what stage or research should we make our data publicly available, for example, on OSF?
Okay, so I'm not sure I understood whether the focus was on corpus data or data that are already the result of some analysis, but
yeah, so I think, oh, sorry, but maybe I didn't. So, so Susanna asked which platform would you recommend us to share metadata for? I'm not too sure about metadata for second language acquisition studies. So maybe Susanna, if you could clarify a bit. So. Okay, so another question from Abu. I'll make this the final question.
But if you want, I'm just gonna answer. I mean, if I got the point, yeah. You know, that's what we want to do with Clarin. Clarin has a repository of corpora that you can search based on keywords. And so what we want to do next, I mean, for example, we just joined Clarin and we're still working on making sure that the corpora from our center as are there. I mean, the metadata is there, and so people, if you search for a corpus, you'll find our corpora there. So Clarin is certainly one place where to share your corpora. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Paquot. And it's been amazing. The talk, as always, it's a clear and relatable. Well, thank you so much. Pascual, would you like to say something to finish this beautiful series of talks?
Sure. Thank you so much, Yachi, for your wonderful sharing, and of course, Magali, thank you so much for your talk. So much to take into account. Also, thank you for, in a way, leading this process. I think in the near future, probably we will the way we collect and share learner corpus data will be different, and it is amazing that we can use this as a springboard to, number one, think about it. Number two, is to share some practices that will benefit the whole field, I suppose. And I was thinking that at least in the UK, there is these, I think it's the UK data service.org.uk, if I remember well. So this is a specific website where if you are a researcher, you can share your data, not your papers or whatever, but your data. So you can specify the level of sharing you are willing to go into, like you can share the whole thing or just the metadata or some of the, I suppose, some of the metadata, if so.
And if I may add, because I see that there was a similar question about, open groups or community for, you have to, I hope that, a lot of you know about the Learner Corpus Association, which is really, where all of us who specialize in learner corpora, we like to go. There is a conference every 2 years, but they also have a website where, the initial aim was to share corpora, materials, resources. So I'm sure that if you wanted to share some data there, that would be an option too. And that's a nice place to, the association is the registration is free for PhD students. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Yeah. No, that's a wonderful resource for everyone out there doing learner corpus research. So okay, I suppose we have to call it a day. Magali, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I know
Thank
you are
to you.
very busy. You found the time to share this fantastic research initiative with all of us. We are looking forward to learning more about this one and getting you said January 2024 version 2 will be available.
But it's already online, right? So there were
online.
links on one slide. So maybe perhaps when we're done, I can share the links in the Q&A, or if somebody can do that for me.
Share that with the
but we are really looking forward to receiving feedback in the next month. So yeah.
Okay, so good to hear. Thank you everyone that popped down today. This is the end of the 2023 edition. It's been an absolute pleasure to have this edition going on and chair some of the sessions, co-chair some others. And thank you again, Magali. Thank you everyone that joined us today. Take care, everyone. See you soon somewhere.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.